Have you ever thought that you fully understood The Little House on the Prairie? That it was only a story about love, kindness, and family bonds? But behind that peaceful picture were truths far more painful. The actors who once found their way into the hearts of millions of viewers did not receive endings as beautiful as the ones on screen. One passed away quietly, amid rumors that cut deeply into questions of sexuality. Another died of AIDS and had to endure cruel stigma. Another left this world far too young, just as the light of fame was only beginning to flicker. And today, for the first time, we will open the saddest hidden corners to see the heartbreaking truth behind the roles that once became unforgettable memories. Number 1. Katherine MacGregor as Harriet Olsen. Katherine MacGregor entered Little House on the Prairie like a headwind against all the softness of the prairie. Born on January 12, 1925, she began portraying Harriet Olsen in 1974 at the age of 49, and turned that sharp-tongued, gossip-loving, difficult shopkeeper into an irreplaceable salty flavor of the entire series. Harriet had spite, vanity, and drama, but she also carried a rhythm that felt deeply real and deeply human, making viewers both irritated and unable to look away. MacGregor did not appear merely to highlight the kindness of others. She came to stir it, to test it, and with her powerful stage presence, she seemed to live completely inside that woman. Then time passed, and the lights faded into the distance. Katherine MacGregor died on November 13, 2018, in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles, at the age of 93, leaving behind an estimated fortune of around $2 million. But what remained was greater than money. It was a very distinctive television legacy. While many people kept chasing the glow of Hollywood, she quietly stepped away from the screen, returned to local theater, taught acting to children, and turned towards spiritual life as a way of closing the brightest chapter of her life. It was an ending without noise, yet it carried the elegance and bitterness of a star who clearly understood the price of fame. The saddest part of her story was not on screen, but in the moment she turned her back on the very world that had made her name. In 1984, MacGregor refused to return for the final episode of The Little House on the Prairie. It was not because of rumors, but because of long-lasting emotional wounds in a backstage atmosphere, heavy with male dominance, crude jokes, and the shock of Michael Landon's affair, which shattered her artistic faith. Amid the laughter behind the camera, she gradually became isolated, then quietly walked away from the spotlight. And perhaps the saddest irony of all is that the woman who created such a fierce Harriet Olsen, in real life, chose to end all the noise with silence. Number 2. Michael Landon as Charles Ingalls. Michael Landon appeared in Little House on the Prairie as the embodiment of a lost American dream. Born on October 31, 1936, in New York, he began playing Charles Ingalls in 1974 at the age of 38, and immediately carved himself into the audience's memory with the image of a calm, kind, strong father, filled with love. There was something very unusual in Landon, a light that felt both warm and steady, as if the moment he stepped into the frame, every fear on the prairie grew softer. He did not simply play an ideal father. He almost became the face of protection for an entire era of television. But that radiance did not last forever. Michael Landon died on July 1, 1991, at the age of 54, from pancreatic cancer, only a few months after the illness was diagnosed during a skiing vacation. He passed away at his home in Malibu, leaving behind an estate estimated at about $40 million, and a legacy far too great to be contained within only a few roles. Time has pushed the image of Charles Ingalls deep into memory, but the shadow of that television father still remains, both brilliant and quietly sorrowful. What makes Landon's story so bitter is the paradox between the screen and real life. Behind the gentle smile was a deeply controversial private life, from the noisy divorce with Lynn No to the relationship with Cindy Clerico while the series was still at its peak, accounts of inappropriate jokes on set, the exhaustion of the entire cast and crew, and Katherine MacGregor's refusal to return for the final episode caused that beautiful image to crack in the most shocking way. After everything, Charles Ingalls is still loved, but Michael Landon in real life came to a close, like a glorious fate, filled with fractures, dazzling, yet lonely. Number 3. Victor French as Isaiah Edwards. Victor French came to Little House on the Prairie like a rough streak of dust across fields filled with morality and gentleness. Born on December 4, 1934, in California, he stepped into the role of Isaiah Edwards in 1974 at the age of 40, bringing with him a thick beard, his signature straw hat, and an energy that was both rugged and warm. Edwards liked alcohol, spoke in a plain and rustic way, and had an uneven outward appearance. Yet beneath it all was a strangely kind heart. That contrast was exactly what made Victor French such a special soul of the series, walking beside Michael Landon in one of the rare artistic friendships of American television. He did not merely play a man of the frontier, he made that character live as though he had risen from the very soil, wind, and losses of the prairie. But in the end, even that glow was covered by the dust of time. Victor French passed away on June 15, 1989, in Los Angeles, only 3 months after being diagnosed with lung cancer at the age of 54. He left behind 3 children, an estimated fortune of about $2 million, and a quiet yet lasting legacy in the hearts of audiences. From Gunsmoke, Bonanza, to Highway to Heaven, he was never the kind of star who dazzled with glamour, but he was always the face people remembered for honesty. The most bitter part of Victor French's fate lay in the darkness behind those touching scenes. He went through 2 broken marriages, struggled with alcoholism for many years, and lived under the pressure of being an outstanding supporting actor who always stood in someone else's shadow. The cold remark Michael Landon once made, that French died from alcohol and not from cancer, made that tragedy cut even deeper. A man who brought warmth to the screen was, in real life, quietly worn down by loneliness, typecasting, and cracks that never fully healed. And perhaps that very contradiction became the saddest pause in Victor French's legacy. Number 4. Richard Bull as Nels Olsen. Richard Bull was born on June 26, 1924, in Zion, Illinois. He began playing Nels Olsen in 1974, when he was 49 years old. On screen, Nels was the patient and gentle husband, almost always standing in the middle of the emotional storms of the Olsen family, with quiet kindness. Bull did not need grand gestures to shine. It was that restraint, that enduring gaze, and that calm presence that made him the quiet anchor of the series. A man who seemed to stand at the edge of the story, yet stayed in the audience's memory for a very long time. Richard Bull passed away on the morning of February 3, 2014, in Calabasas, California, from complications of pneumonia at the age of 89. In his final years, he lived with his wife, actress Barbara Collentine, at the Motion Picture and Television Fund. His estimated fortune of about $1.5 million was not a symbol of dazzling glory, but a reflection of a steady, private, and enduring career. After Little House, he continued working with Michael Landon in Highway to Heaven, like a beautiful echo of a golden era that had long faded into the past. But what gives Richard Bull's story its bitter aftertaste lies in that very quietness. The role of Nels was originally meant to be only a small part in a few episodes, until a brief conversation with Michael Landon changed the course of his career into a 7-year contract. It sounds like destiny, yet behind it was a sad paradox. Bull once admitted that staying too long in a beloved role sometimes made him feel trapped in a single mold. As a man who loved the stage more than the screen and lived a very private life, he had to silently endure the pressure of fame, then eventually step away from Hollywood, as if choosing silence to preserve the last part of his true self. Number 5. Kevin Hagen as Dr. Hiram Baker. Kevin Hagen was born on April 3, 1928, in Chicago, Illinois. He took on the role of Dr. Hiram Baker in 1974, when he was 46 years old. With his black leather bag, his calm voice, and eyes that always seemed to carry compassion, Hagen turned the town doctor into a symbol of devotion and salvation. He did not need grand gestures to move the audience. It was that quiet, steady, and deeply trustworthy presence that made him more than a man who healed the sick. He became, in many ways, the kind heartbeat of Walnut Grove. But behind the television lights, Kevin Hagen's life moved toward a very different place. He passed away on July 9, 2005, in Grants Pass, Oregon, after a long battle with esophageal cancer, at the age of 77. At the time of his death, his estimated fortune was around $1 million, a modest figure that reflected a career without scandal, without showmanship, only quiet dedication. Time has moved far away from the years when he was a familiar face on American television. Yet the image of that gentle doctor remains as a calm legacy in the memory of viewers. What is most haunting about Hagen's fate lies in the part of his life that few people ever saw. He believed his illness came not only from the body, but also from years of inner torment, depression, and the feeling of being forgotten in invisible supporting roles. Then, in 2004, he refused chemotherapy, saying that he was not afraid of death, only afraid of living with nothing left to give. It was not only a controversial decision, but also a sorrowful pause in the life of a man who spent his whole life healing others, yet in the end slipped away quietly, without anyone ever truly healing him. Number 6. Hersha Parody as Alice Garvey. Hersha Parody was born on May 25, 1945, in Berea, Ohio, under the birth name Betty Sandhoff. She began playing Alice Garvey in 1977, when she was 32 years old. On screen, Alice was a gentle wife and a devoted mother, bringing the kind of quiet warmth that audiences always needed amid the upheavals of Walnut Grove. Hersha did not act through showiness. She let the character live through her eyes, her softness, and a very real sense of peace. Because of that, Alice Garvey became one of the most tragic figures in the entire series. Hersha Parody passed away on August 23, 2023, in Norfolk, Virginia, at the age of 78, after spending her final years dependent on the care of her family because of a brain tumor. Her son said that she died in the arms of loved ones. Her estimated estate was around $200,000, drawn mainly from royalties from classic television roles. Before and beyond Little House, she had appeared in Mannix and The Waltons, but the spotlight never belonged to the loud and dazzling kind. What remained was only a thin, sorrowful legacy, one that can still leave people choked up when they remember her. But the most haunting thing lay in the death of Alice Garvey on screen. The scene in which her character died while trying to save a child from a fire shocked millions of viewers, was seen as too cruel, and gave rise to bitter rumors behind the scenes. After that episode, Hersha received harassing phone calls, was blamed for a fictional tragedy, and almost disappeared from the entertainment industry. Some people believed that she carried that psychological scar for the rest of her life. And that was perhaps the saddest irony of all. A gentle woman remembered forever by audiences through the flames that destroyed not only her character, but also part of her real life. Number 7. Karl Swenson as Lars Hanson. Karl Swenson was born on July 23, 1908, in Brooklyn, New York. He joined the series in 1974 at the age of 66, playing Lars Hanson, a Swedish-born carpenter, and also the founder and first mayor of the town. On screen, Swenson brought a kind face, a warm, deep voice, and a presence that made Lars feel like more than just a character, almost like the conscience of the whole community. He did not need noise or drama to leave an impression. With nothing more than calmness and a deeply human sense of depth, Karl Swenson made Lars Hanson become part of the soul of the show. But his fate came to a close far too soon, and in a way that felt painfully cold. Karl Swenson passed away on October 8, 1978, in Torrington, Connecticut, at the age of 70, only a few days after filming his final scene for the series. The cause was a sudden heart attack. He was laid to rest at Center Cemetery in Connecticut, leaving behind an estimated estate of about $800,000 and a career of more than 40 years that was respected by his colleagues. His legacy was not the kind that blazed brightly. It was more like a steady light, quiet, lasting, and classic. What makes Karl Swenson's story so haunting even today is the almost overwhelming coincidence between his role and his real life. Only days after filming the scene in which Lars Hanson breathed his last in Charles Ingalls' arms, Swenson himself also quietly passed away. He had even once said words that sounded almost like a prophecy, that he had already lived enough of Lars's life. And from that moment on, the line between performance and fate seemed to disappear, leaving behind a rare and sorrowful silence after the glow of fame. Number 8. Dabbs Greer as Reverend Robert Alden. Dabbs Greer was born on April 2, 1917, in Fairview, Missouri. He came to the role of Reverend Robert Alden in 1974, when he was 57 years old. On screen, Greer brought such kindness, patience, and warmth that every time he appeared, he felt like the man preserving the last piece of conscience in Walnut Grove. From weddings and baptisms to moments of farewell, he was always there at the right time, quiet yet impossible to replace. He did not need grand scenes to leave a mark, because that calm presence alone made him seem like the moral soul of the series. Dabbs Greer passed away on April 28, 2007, in Pasadena, California, from complications of heart failure and kidney failure at the age of 90. He was buried in his home state of Missouri, leaving behind an estate estimated at around $800,000 after nearly 70 years in the profession. He never married and had no children, and his life came to a close in a silence that almost perfectly matched the characters he had played. The glory was there, but it was always a distant and fragile kind of light, one that never fully belonged to him. The most bitter part of Greer's fate was hidden inside that very humility. He once admitted that he was the only person on the set without a fixed filming schedule, called in only when there was a wedding or a funeral. It was a sentence as light as the wind, yet it carried the quiet disappointment of a man who always stood at the edge of the story. There were days when he sat in the makeup room for hours just to say a single line. And then, in one of Hollywood's saddest ironies, the man who brought blessings to every other character became the quietest figure within his own legacy. Number 9. Steve Tracy as Percival Dalton. Steve Tracy was born on October 3, 1952, in Ohio. His real name was Stephen Crumrine. He played Percival Dalton in 1980, when he was only 27 years old. On screen, Percival was intelligent, courteous, and warm. He was the kind of man refined enough to soften Nellie Olsen's sharp edge without losing his own character. Steve gave the role a very natural elegance, never showy, yet still unforgettable to viewers. He did not simply play an ideal husband. He almost turned Percival into a graceful bright spot amid the noise of the prairie. But that glow was painfully short-lived. Steve Tracy passed away on November 27, 1986, at only 34 years old, from complications related to AIDS, during a time when America was still overshadowed by fear, prejudice, and silence. His ashes were quietly scattered beneath the letter D of the Hollywood sign, as if a dream that had only just reached the light had been forced to close far too soon. At the time of his death, his estate was worth only about $200,000, a small figure for a talent that had only just begun to bloom before fate cut it short without mercy. What makes Steve Tracy's story most haunting is the contradiction between his gentleness on screen and his lonely struggle in real life. He was known as a courteous gentleman, and he was especially close to Alison Arngrim, so much so that people on the set speculated about a romance. But later, Arngrim revealed that she was the only person who knew Steve was gay, a secret he had to keep hidden in an era that could destroy an entire career. 6 months before his death, he stepped onto the stage of AIDS U.S. portraits in personal courage, and from being a television face, he became a quiet symbol of courage. In the end, Steve did not leave this world in scandal, but in a beautiful sorrow, and in a loneliness too deep for words. Number 10. Shannen Doherty as Jenny Wilder. Shannen Doherty entered the final season of Little House on the Prairie like a young ray of light that viewers immediately sensed would never stay still in the dark. Born on April 12, 1971, in Memphis, Tennessee, she took on the role of Jenny Wilder in 1982 at just 11 years old. Jenny was the orphaned niece of Almanzo, and Laura, a little girl who carried sorrow, fragility, and a kind of strength that had bloomed far too early. From her very first scenes, Shannen already had eyes that could tell a story, a natural acting style, and emotions more mature than her age, as though she was not simply stepping into a role, but walking straight into the hearts of the audience. But the road that followed became a long ballad filled with both glory and heartbreak. Shannen passed away on July 13, 2024, at the age of 53, after a long battle with stage 4 breast cancer that had spread to her bones and brain. In her final hours, she was surrounded by family, loved ones, and her dog, Bowie. Before she passed, she left behind an estimated fortune of about $5 million, along with an enormous legacy from Beverly Hills, 90210 and Charmed, the roles that turned her into a Hollywood pop culture icon. What made Shannen's fate both shocking and haunting was the contrast between her rebellious image and her courage at the end of her life. In the 1990s, she was labeled a bad girl of Hollywood because of backstage controversies, conflicts with co-stars, repeated lateness, and being fired after 4 seasons of 90210. But the real tragedy arrived in 2015, when she openly shared her fight against cancer with a kind of honesty that felt almost completely bare. She was no longer an unruly star. Shannen became a woman who turned pain into dignity, and perhaps her deepest legacy does not lie in scandal, but in the way she looked straight at fate without bowing her head. Number 11. Ernest Borgnine as Jonathan Garvey. Ernest Borgnine was born on January 24, 1917, in Hamden, Connecticut. He joined the series in the late 1970s when he was already past 60, in the role of Jonathan Garvey, the kind-hearted, broad-shouldered neighbor and emotional anchor of Walnut Grove. Borgnine carried the feeling of experience, calm, and the weight of a life that had already weathered many storms, so whenever he appeared, Garvey did not simply bring a sense of safety, he also brought a warmth that felt deeply masculine and unmistakably old-fashioned. He did not have to strain to become memorable. With that strong yet gentle presence alone, Ernest Borgnine almost became the sturdy soul of the role. Borgnine died on July 8, 2012, in Los Angeles, at the age of 95, from kidney failure after a short period of treatment at Cedars-Sinai. He left behind an estimated fortune of around $15 million, the result of more than 6 decades of tireless work. From his Oscar-winning performance in Marty in 1955 to his memorable work in The Wild Bunch and The Poseidon Adventure, he was the kind of star who never truly faded, but simply grew old quietly with time. But the thing that gave Ernest Borgnine's fate its most bitter aftertaste was an unbelievably short-lived marriage to the legendary Ethel Merman. Their wedding in 1964 once shocked Hollywood. Then just 32 days later, it collapsed in controversy, leaving behind endless rumors about his fiery and blunt personality. That was the saddest paradox of all. A man who always seemed steady and trustworthy on screen had, in real life, once watched his private life crack apart under the lights and public scrutiny. And perhaps it was that very fracture that made Borgnine's brilliance shine even more brightly, in a sadder way. Number 12. Melissa Gilbert as Laura Ingalls. Melissa Gilbert entered Little House on the Prairie like a ray of sunshine that had already become a memory for an entire generation. Born on May 8, 1964, in Los Angeles, California, she took on the role of Laura Ingalls Wilder at only 10 years old, and quickly became one of the iconic faces of America in the 1970s. Melissa's bright eyes, curly brown hair, and energy that was both playful and strong-willed made Laura feel like the soul of the prairie, a place where love, morality, and courage were always preserved through seasons of fierce winds. She did not simply play a little country girl, she almost became the pure heartbeat of the film itself. But time always travels farther than any glory. As of April 2026, Melissa Gilbert is still living in the Catskill Mountains with her third husband, Timothy Busfield, continuing to write books and occasionally appearing on stage. An estimated net worth of around $500,000 may seem modest beside the glory of a former child star, once loved by the whole world. But the legacy she has left behind is far greater. Beyond Little House, Melissa also made a lasting impression through Choices of the Heart, as a reminder that her light was never tied to only one role. What makes Melissa's story most haunting lies behind the image of the perfect Laura. 2 failed marriages, a history of alcohol abuse, and a quiet spinal injury once pushed her to the edge, under the pressure of having to live forever in the shadow of the little country girl the public never wanted to let go of. But the most beautiful paradox is there as well. From a child star who seemed to be dimmed by time, Melissa quietly found herself again in a simple life, as though after every storm, Laura Ingalls had finally found her way home. The peaceful fields of the Little House on the Prairie have now faded far into the past, but their images still live on in the hearts of so many viewers. After all the glory, the tears, and the painful truths behind the screen, they left behind not only unforgettable roles, but also stories that linger in people's hearts for a very long time. What part of their fate moved you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy surprising behind-the-scenes stories about classic television shows, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next videos.